plant clinic makes an important contribution to the community. It's a place where people can get together, learn about the kinds of plants that are in their gardens. They can learn about sustainable gardening, and also they can learn about the pests and diseases that bother the plants, especially here in the Northwest.
This is what's called a spittlebug.
Oh.
And see, it makes all this spit. See, let me just wipe that away.
Ugh.
Oh, it's just like, I don't know what it is, but there is the actual critter. Do you see?
When I was a kid,
Look
we used
at
to
him.
call this snake
You wanna-
spit.
Here, take the hand lens and you can take a look at him. On your fingernail or mine, you choose.
Oh, what a cutie.
And that's how he protects himself.
It's got red eyes.
So all you need to do is just blast the plant with cold water and get it off. It won't hurt the plant at all.
Hello.
Hi, how are you today?
I'm fine, thank you.
What did you bring for us?
Well, I wish I knew. I don't know what this is, but it's really hurting.
We would need a lot more to give you a good diagnosis, but I can ask you a few questions. First of
Okay.
all, can you tell me where this is growing?
Oh yes, it's just to the north of the house.
To the north of the house.
Yes.
Does it get sun, a lot of sun, or does it get a lot of shade?
Let me think. You know, I really haven't paid much attention. Oh, I think it gets probably 50-50. 50 shade, 50% sun.
How about water? Do you water it ever?
Yes, at the summertime I do, yes.
Can you tell me how tall this plant grows?
I think it's about this tall.
Okay. And is it floppy or is it sort of stiff and upright?
You know, it does both.
Okay. Does it ever have flowers on it?
Not that I remember.
This is a really hard situation for you and for me because there's just not really enough information. I could make an educated guess about what this plant is, but I might be wrong. So I would
Okay.
rather have an adequate sample. And if you could bring back telling us how much sun it gets and what
How
else do you
old
have
it
there?
is,
if any of the plants around it or affected. I know this sounds like a lot of information, but the
Yes,
more information you give us, the better job we're able to do
Okay,
for
I
you.
see.
Wow. So, tell me all that you know about this plant.
This is a Japanese umbrella plant.
Mm-hmm.
We've had it for about 3 years, and it hasn't been doing well for almost that length of time.
This is a really good sample, and I see you even brought bits of the root too.
Yes, we have dug it up because I'm so concerned about the plant, and so it was quite easy to bring in today for me. I didn't know maybe if there was a root problem with it.
Usually if it's a root problem, it'll start dying out at the top and then it'll work its way down.
I see. Okay.
So a few things about the culture of this plant. It likes really rich, moist, humusy soil. And it doesn't like any shade, particularly late afternoon sun. So if could you have it growing somewhere with an eastern exposure?
No, actually it had western exposure.
Oh.
It got almost all day sun, and I was thinking that maybe it was getting too much sun.
I think it is, and actually it does not look that bad to me. I think if you take it home and water it and baby it and put it in a location where it will only get morning sun or filtered light throughout the day, it'll do a whole lot better. This is a very old genus of plants that's been around for a long time, and it's called an umbrella pine. Very unusual, beautiful specimen plant. It could get maybe 15 or 20 feet tall, but you know, it doesn't actually look that sick to me. I think there's some few cultural problems that could be fixed if you go home and get it in the right location. Be sure to mulch it and keep it damp throughout the summer. I think you'll find a lot of improvement. You might want to prune out some of these limbs that look like they're broken.
Yes.
Or maybe some of these limbs that are crossing, so it has a little more air circulation and room to grow.
Good idea.
Yeah.
Thank you for
You're
that.
welcome.
Now, should I fertilize it, do you think? Besides the mulch?
When it's this stressed, I wouldn't fertilize it until the fall, seeing how you're doing. If the plant's really stressed and you fertilize it heavily, it's going to try to absorb too much nutrients when it's trying to put out new roots and get established, and that wouldn't be such a good solution.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, well,
You've been
thank
very
you for bringing it
helpful.
in. If you look it up in that book, it'll give us some idea of where to start.
One of the great things about Plant Clinic is that they have all these resources of these great books to look up. And at our WSU clinic in Port Hadlock, there's even a larger amount of books that we can access, as well as on the web.
My guess is that it's dry. This is either some kind of a fungal disease or some kind of a cultural problem. That's just an educated guess. Could you take a picture of the tree and bring it in to us? Because I think we need a little more information on this one. That would be really helpful, so we could have a little more information. One leaf sometimes is really hard to diagnose something.
As you can see, it's very important to bring an adequate size sample, or at least a really good digital photo of the plant that you're trying to have diagnosed. Here are some questions you need to ask yourself. What is the plant? Where is it located on your property? Have there been any unusual weather patterns in the last 4 to 6 months? What type of soil is it planted in? How old is the plant? When was it planted? When did the problem develop? Are any other plants affected? Describe the cultural practices used: water, fertilizer, pruning, mowing the lawn or weed whacking around it, mulching. Have any herbicides been used recently by yourself or even by your neighbor that may have drifted by? Is the plant protected or is it exposed to the wind? Does it get morning sun, afternoon sun, full sun, morning shade, afternoon shade, or full shade? How often is your plant watered and how much? These kinds of questions will help the master gardeners diagnose or identify your plants. Another important feature of Plant Clinic is education. This week we're featuring year-round vegetable gardening. Every week there's another focus. So any question at Plant Clinic is a good question.
Something that you need today. I got it on my computer.
Today we're going to get down and dirty with Larry, who's going to teach us all about soil. Larry, what makes soil up?
Soil is a very complex mixture. It has 3 basic ingredients, which we might describe as sand, silt, and clay. Now, everybody knows the size of a grain of sand. Silt, if you want to get specific, might be 1/100th as big as a grain of sand. On the other hand, the clay particles are so small that it would require a microscope to be able to look at them. So these are the 3 particles that constitute soil. When assembled, they form what's known as a PED, which is a PED. Now, let us also consider that soil, to my surprise, is approximately 50% air. And the air is present because of 2 factors. We will call it the macro and the micro. The macro orifices and holes in the soil are something that an earthworm might do. On the other hand, the micropores are just the little teeny interstices between the sand, silt, and clay.
Are there other things in soil as well?
Yes, indeed. We might speak first of the organic matter in the soil, which, as you know, is all important for a number of reasons, which I will mention later. Also, the air that's in the soil, as you know, is 80% nitrogen, but that nitrogen is not available for plant nourishment. The micropores and the macropores, as I mentioned, retain water. Water drains very easily through the macropores, such as the size of an earthworm hole, but the micropores retain a great deal of water because of the inherent surface tension of the water itself. So even though the soil might not drain at all, it still will retain water that will nourish the plant.
You often hear the term the soil is alive. What does that refer to, Larry?
The soil is indeed alive. It is literally teeming with all sorts of living organisms. You could start with the bacteria. You could work up through the different nematodes and the different fungi that are there, and on up to, let's say, earthworms and moles that are obviously in somebody's soil. I hope it's not in mine. So let us think that the soil is an organism, that you should treat the soil like you would treat a living plant, to try to nourish it and to get the best out of it.
Last year my blueberries did wonderfully well, but my carrots didn't come up at all. What's happening there?
Well, you have a problem, young lady, and I think that we should approach it in a realistic manner. Have you ever heard of pH? pH stands for 1 over the log of the H ion concentration, which is very technical. But what that boils down to is that a pH of 5 has 10 times as much acidity as a pH of 6. And now, blueberries love acid soil, so I bet you are a low pH gardener. Whereas a high pH of, let us say, the 6 to 7 range, which is more common in vegetable gardens, would help the carrots produce. A pH of 7 is neutral, meaning there is as much acid as alkalinity in that solution. Now, for soil testing, the first thing we want to know is what is a pH. And that is all important for one very good reason, that it influences how much of other soil nutrients can be absorbed by the plants. If the pH gets too low, as an example, aluminum toxicity will occur in plants. I mean, that's indeed rare, but I just mention it to show that the pH can affect the solubility and absorption of different elements in the soil.
I bought this at the local hardware store. Will this help me with my testing my soil?
Now, these kits of a do-it-yourself type are not nearly as accurate as some of the more esoteric chemical firms and university extensions. These professional sites can measure very accurately the amount of potash and phosphorus in your soil, as well as some of the minor elements that we're interested in, such as calcium and magnesium and sulfur, as well as a trace element called boron, which is very important in this area. The Master Gardener's website mentions several places that you can send your samples, including the University of Massachusetts, which is where I personally send my samples.
When I'm sending my samples, Larry, do I have to be specific? Like my problem with my blueberries versus my carrots, do I need to tell them that this is what I want them to test for?
Well, I would mention my problem and trust that they are smart enough to analyze your specimens and come out with your answer to your blueberries being successful, but not the carrots. It's very important that we collect the soil specimens correctly, and this is where you will get some exercise. What you should do is take specimens from several areas where you plan to garden, and you should dig a hole and deep enough so that you can sample the top 12 inches of soil. You might do this in 3 or 4 or 5 places around your garden and mix all of this into one large container, and then take a sample of all these samples. And it would be very handy when you send your specimen away to mention what my problems are, where I live. You might also want to mention the rainfall in the area, because all of this would enter into the, basically what you're receiving is not only a chemical analysis, but a consultation is what you might do to improve your soil. and what fertilizers to add, or whether you need more organic matter or whatever.
I see you've brought some samples. What's this, Larry?
This is organic matter known as compost, and it is an essential part of any good soil. This, when mixed with the other components that I can show you here, will give us what I call my garden mix, which is 1/3 compost, 1/3 topsoil, and 1/3, the final third, is sand. By mixing the 3 ingredients in this ratio, we have what to me has been a very successful start for my garden. The pH of this is just slightly on the acid side, which vegetables prefer. It's obviously very porous and will drain well. And this is in contrast to my native soil here, which has absolutely no organic matter in it. This is by analysis, and it is very low in the components that you test for: phosphorus, potash, and the minor elements. Now, organic matter in the soil can add nutrients. The nutrients vary, obviously, a great deal depending upon what sort of organic matter you have. We all know that manure is good, and interestingly enough, it's the bird manure, such as chickens, that have the highest concentration of fertilizer. But in contrast to the so-called processed fertilizers that you buy at the hardware store, the nitrogen content might be estimated at 2, whereas the nitrogen content of a processed fertilizer might be anywhere from 10 to 30. But on the other hand, this chicken for fertilizer adds organic matter, which is the important part of any organic fertilizer, is you get some of the organic matter in there that can decay and add nitrogen to the soil.
So Larry, what's the difference between using organic fertilizers and using chemical fertilizers?
A great deal of difference, and what you're doing with the processed fertilizers, I call them processed fertilizers versus unprocessed. The processed fertilizers have a high concentration, and you've seen packages that might read 20, 10, 10, or something of that nature. Now that's pretty powerful stuff. And in my opinion, for what it's worth, you should only use commercial fertilizers after having a soil test, so you know exactly what to add and how much of each. For instance, if your pH is low, you need to sweeten your soil by adding lime, which is mainly calcium. If your soil is a little too alkaline, you can acidify it, although I've never heard of anyone around here having to do that. You acidify by adding pure sulfur.
Thanks, Larry, for giving us the dirt on soil. Next, we'll be visiting with Katie at Gaia's Garden.
In my garden, I plant carrot seeds. In my garden.
Katie, this is so lush and beautiful.
Thank you. It was a construction site just 2 years ago, and we pushed a big pile next to the house that came out of the hole, and then we had all the leftover stuff formed into this long skinny bed, and we piled up a number of things that are involved in sheet mulching. Even though we didn't cover grass, we used the old cardboard from the appliance boxes and the layers of compost, and built up And we also used the old dirt that was just the gravel from the pad that was here before and the old stuff that was dug out of the hole. And then we enriched it with compost and shaped these beds. This one was added later. It's really just compost and straw and cardboard piled up and left. There are a lot of bulbs. It's just a big daffodil show right now, which is good. And then later in the year, I try and plant things, with the exception of the daffodils, that are pollinator attractors. That's what the ribes is for. The flowering currant is a big favorite of hummingbirds, and so it's protected from the deer. This wallflower is a totally stalwart plant. It blooms all year long. It never did stop blooming. Then it cut it back a little, and it's covered with bees and all sorts of insects all summer long. When the daffodils go by, I almost always plant seeds for poppies or something else showy and easy that are not deer attractors. Tried to separate the things that the deer don't like out here and then protect them in the little courtyard things that are more delicate.
And it looks like your beds are lined with just found.
It's all found stuff. We really didn't bring in, we brought in compost, but we didn't bring in anything. And we used old broken concrete to make the sort of patio space. This was the fence that was out front, and it was falling down the boards. We used the boards for something too, but these were the
posts?
uprights. They were. They were sort of in a stack, and then they just became part of the whole.
And this is an elderberry?
It's sambucus. Yes, it is an elderberry. It's the dark one, and it too gets really eaten by the deer. So that's what those little bundles of dog hair in the little net things. They've kind of worked. I mean, I should have put more because where they are, the deer haven't eaten them.
Oh, I've got to try that.
The west wind swoops right through here. So I've learned the things that can't tolerate it. The rosemary and lavender are really happy, and I'm very indulgent with foxglove because I love them, and then I sort of deadhead them before they spew seeds about. And I've left this spot to put cosmos and used some old dirt from somewhere that was not enriched. So it's definitely still spring here, but it was a thrill that first year we had straw stacked up for so long. My husband that first spring said, is it always going to be straw? But by that summer you could push it apart and begin to plant the perennials. So that was pretty thrilling to have the soil made over the winter.
So this is very inspiring because it's only about 2 years old.
This will be its third summer. And the first one was totally building it. There's a lens of water that sort of comes from the house that I really would try to capture. So my goal here is to make new beds. This one is totally straw and a layer of compost, and last year I put all the cuttings out of the garden, just threw them there, and it's called sheet mulching in place. There's a layer of cardboard down to begin with, but the hope will be that I can plant it with really deer resistant things like more evergreen huckleberry, lots more lavender, things that can fill this in and soak up the water that runs this way.
So the cardboard is to keep weeds?
It does do that. It also it's a more elegant word than rot. It breaks down in the same way that it brings carbon to the construction the same way the straw does. But it does form that impenetrable. So you can do it on top of grass if you layer the cardboard so that it overlaps by about 6 inches.
So we're kind of building a compost in place.
It's exactly what it is.
And then using it as a garden bed.
Yes. I mean, you have to sort of be able to put up with looking at straw and dirt. But if you didn't want to, you could cover it much more tidily with a layer of compost and then push aside places right away, not even waiting for it to break down, and put a little bit of potting soil in and plant. I've seen that done really nicely. So it isn't like you have to look at this for months unless you don't, you don't mind, or you're willing to just let the whole process take over. You also is a good opportunity for growing a cover crop, which I may do, but I might use poppies instead of clover, but something that you seed on the top and then cut it down before it goes to seed. That's a really common use of. I wanted to show you this bed, which is shaped like a U, to be a sun trap, so that you have more edges, because one of the permaculture principles that's sort of interesting, it's actually, I think it's from ecology in general, is that the edges are where things happen, like at the edge where the grass meets the forest, where the gravel meets the bed, but then you get more space, you can reach it more easily too, but that's why it has this particular shape. This bed was built, it was small when we first divided it into 4. I sort of like those old formal gardens, the 4-square gardens, but mine isn't very square, but it has that same sort of thinking. And then I enlarged this one, which was another just stack up of the same elements. And it too captures some of that water that runs off. So I tried to put plants at that end that like water, because it gets wet down there. Things run this way. I, from the beginning, have wanted more vegetables than I really have, but I've tried to mix them in so that they become a decorative garden too. I mean, haven't got a lot of sun here, but enough that all the good things that go all like kale and I've left the kale go to seed because, as you can see, it's good for the early pollinators when there isn't much else yet around for them. But I'll try and keep an eye on it before it goes to seed. But that's why it's sprouting. Not a very fussy garden.
And there are a lot of herbs in here as well.
That's exactly what they're. You know, one of my favorite permaculture principles. They're the most wonderful, good living sorts of rules, really, about how to make your life just better. It's as much about people and the way we live as it is just plants, and it's by no means impossibly scientific. In the book that I love so much, it's called Gaia's Garden by Toby Hemingway, he talks about if your herb garden is so far that you get your slippers wet when you go to get the herbs for the scrambled eggs, then it's too far from the house. So that was my thinking there. Yes, and I'd like more herbs, and I have another important thing with permaculture is to try and have vegetables that go all year long. So I have these 2 kinds of sorrel, which we use a lot. This one in particular has a really. Do you know that one? It's a peppery sort of. It's different. And then the more conventional French sorrel is there. And I put the evergreen huckleberry there because they are just the world's most wonderful plant. They could be out. The deer don't eat them, but bees love them, and I like to watch the insects come for sure. I have a lot of frogs. It's a great pleasure is to have so many frogs. Permaculture it's such an awkward word, really, that it's never seemed very inspiring to me, and for some reason when I hear it I'm always afraid the garden won't be beautiful. But permaculture gardens have been the most amazing gardens because they're so interesting. They sort of satisfy and make a home for all kinds of different creatures. And we don't have many birds in this little section because the cat lives here. But other than that, there are frogs and bugs and all sorts of things. And then people, that food and beautiful plants. And
it's so lush and yet so new. I think it's very inspiring to people to realize that permaculture isn't this strange technique that's beyond their ability to do. You've shown us that it's really sort of an easier way of going about it when you think about it.
Oh, without a doubt. It is far easier because it's really, the most important thing is to make good dirt, which any good gardener will tell you that. But somehow good dirt meant just hauling in a little topsoil, but permaculture allows you to make these big deep beds, and suddenly a lot of your problems are gone. They hold a lot more moisture. There's room for lots of soil activity from the microbes that make it good soil, and you just you know, I've let the beech strawberry, which is a native plant, pretty much have its way underneath these trees because it doesn't compete with them very much. They have little shallow roots, and yet, I mean, I always kind of hope they'll actually have strawberries, but they don't. They're just, but they're ground cover. They're easy to pull out, and I don't have bare soil that has room for weed seeds to germinate. And I've also planted, the bulbs are really good for our Mediterranean climate. These are species tulips, the little tartas, and then this one doesn't seem like a species tulip, but I don't remember planting anything else. But there's such a quick hit of color when you need it, and then they go dormant and disappear pretty much in the summer. I put soaker hoses in all these beds, but I've never really used them. I water if it gets, you know, we get those 3 days of really warm weather. It can get pretty hot right here, and I'll water by hand a little bit. But a design flaw was there's no water spigot in this space, so that cuts it down. Another big influence on me was Anne Lovejoy's book, the design, organic garden design book. He talks about these are Nepeta dropmore, and they are ever blooming all summer, and they don't seem to, I don't have any little seedlings, but they have wonderful blue flowers that are just awash with bees. And then black-eyed Susans. So it's sturdy plants that are beautiful and cheerful, but they don't use a lot of water, either one of them. For the summer, I really like to do sweet peas. That I use the little stubby knee-high ones that sort of spill over this wall, along with nasturtium. They come out and cover up a lot of the gravel. I have edible peas in the trellis out front and some climbing sweet peas out there. This little bed doesn't look like much right now, but it was mostly because, as you can see, it's really wet here, and I wanted to soak up, I wanted to grow things that would send their roots down. I also really wanted a hop vine. And in the summer last year, this hop vine started from this and went all up the side. It was really wonderful. So we built this bed out of it. Was the same pile of straw. This one was really casually done. And when you use the straw, you can pull off what's called a book, just a big chunk of straw. You don't have to fluff it and spread it. You can lay it down in books so that it's pretty sturdy and heavy and won't blow away. But I was excited to see that this is 1 year. We did it last year. And then it got nasturtium seeds in it somehow, and so last summer it was just covered with, you can see how.
Oh, it's beautiful.
It's nice soil, yeah, and it smells really good, and there was no work. This is a pretty interesting permaculture plant. It's called a mashua vine. I can show you some of the tubers in there. It's actually edible. They're related to nasturtiums, Tropolium.
Yes. They're the little yellow flowers?
They have little orange flowers that the hummingbirds love. Little trumpet, is that what you call that? That shape, the nectar pool in. Yeah. And this hellebore got moved because there was just no room. But that would be my goal, really, is to put the things that the deer don't bother out here in a more lovely situation. It was just, but it's in process. But it grew from there and a few from here and just covered the deer fence. And it makes things sort of like potatoes that you can roast.
So Katie, even your downspout is watering your bed.
That's the theory, and I think hopefully it does, because it's not a very deep one, and I rarely water it. We did put what's called a swale out in front of the other bed, where we dug a hole and put straw down in it so that it would stop the water that ran off of the house, and then let it gradually perk out to that bed out there. So
neat.
Thank you.
It's such a beautiful place. And you've even
Thank you.
recycled an old stove.
Our son came to visit for one weekend, and he helped me build this bed, and he said at the end of the day, "So is there anything else, Mom?" And I said, "Oh yeah, sweetie, there's that Franklin stove over there behind the other little house." And I was just kidding, but it nearly killed us all, but he got it up here. And we used to have one of these, so it's feels friendly in this little living room space, but in truth we more often use the sun umbrella, which is put away for the winter. But
Thank you so much, Katie. This has been such a wonderful visit.
you're so welcome. It's been fun to show how easily you can really have beds that will support so many plants.
Just beyond the flower garden, at the end of the lawn, the curvature of the earth begins, sloping down from there over the length of the country and the smooth surface of the Pacific before it continues across the convex rice fields of Asia, and rising inclines over Europe and the bulging boat-dotted waters of the Atlantic, finally reaching the other side of the house, where it comes up behind a yellow grove of forsythia near a dilapidated picnic table, then passes unerringly under the spot where I am standing, hands in my pockets, feet planted firmly on the ground.